Hello, my name is Graham Moss. I'm the Principal Building Surveyor for the Australian Building Codes Board. This video is a short update on changes to NCC 2022 in the definitions for BCA, that's volumes 1 and 2 of the NCC. So the first definition change is how we've replaced average recurrence interval with annual exceedance probability. Now this change makes the BCA consistent with the AS3500 series, which uses the term annual exceedance probability. Now average recurrence interval, average exceedance probability, these are actually two different ways of saying the same thing, and that is the likelihood of a given event occurring in any given year. And of course, for these defined terms, it's the likelihood of a given rainfall event occurring in any given year. The next definition change is the introduction of a new defined term, building complexity. But before I show it to you, I'm going to show you some trivia. The number of occurrences of defined terms in the BCA. So required, I think, is the most popular defined term in the BCA. It's got 1,033 occurrences across both volumes. I was surprised by performance solution. I thought it wouldn't occur as often as it does, but 620 times you see the defined term performance solution used in BCA Volume 1 and 2. Now, outdoor air, I like this defined term. I don't know about you, but I like defined terms. I quite enjoy definitions. Possibly that's saying more about me than it does about the definition for building complexity. However, outdoor air is not a very popular defined term. It's used 7 times in Volume 1, 4 times in Volume 2, only 11 times. So why is outdoor air one of my favourite definitions? Well, the definition for outdoor air is air outside the building. Now, does that not appeal to you? It appeals to me. I think it's amusing. So that's why I was sad when I only found it used 11 times in the BCA. So building complexity, trivia for you, how many times do we see the words building complexity used in a defined sense in the Building Code of Australia for NCC 2022? 0. It makes outdoor air look popular, doesn't it? Now, building complexity is a new concept included in NCC 2022. It's a way of grading buildings by complexity, but we don't use it in the BCA. We don't use it in the NCC entirely. Now, why are we including it? Well, it could be that we would use it in the NCC in the future, but also in the meantime, it may be that state or territory legislation would refer to this definition and require, for instance, that higher complexity buildings would require further scrutiny, such as peer review. So that's why we've included it, despite not using it. Now I'm going to show you how building complexity works. It works by the 4 criteria that you see in the blue boxes on this slide. We have attributes, and that's where the building exceeds 25 metres effective height, or has performance solutions for fire or structure, or is in a place of natural hazard, for instance, a bushfire-prone land. If you trigger all of those, or even just one of those attributes criteria, then that's triggered that criteria box, and you have 1 criteria for complexity. Next is Class 2. If your building is Class 2, then that criteria applies. Occupant number. If you have more than 100 occupants in the building, then that's also a criteria. And fourthly, occupant ability. If more than 10 of those occupants require evacuation assistance, then you've triggered that criteria. And of course, as you go about triggering criteria, your score increases and you get a higher level of complexity. Low for 1 criteria, medium for 2 criteria. You get the idea. If all 4 criteria are triggered, well, that's very high building complexity. It's also the case that if your building is importance level 4 or importance level 5, so of course we're talking about buildings essential for both disaster operations like hospitals, for instance. If you have an IL4 or IL5 building, then of course that's straight away a very high building complexity. This next change is a new defined term for volume, and that applies for BCA Volume 1. Since its first edition, the BCA has had a definition for floor area, but the BCA has never had a definition for volume. Now, the concept of volume is used a handful of times in BCA Volume 1. They're listed on this slide here. C3D3 for general floor area and volume limitations, C3D4, which uses the concept of volume to describe a large isolated building, E1D8 for some Class 6 buildings of a certain volume, sprinklers are required, and there's also smoke hazard provisions required in E2D10 for large isolated buildings. Again, that concept of volume is used to describe a building for which these smoke hazard management provisions apply. Now, sometimes at the ABCB office we've been receiving calls where people say, look, I'm doing a volume calculation. Like, for instance, I'm trying to find the maximum volume of my compartment. And I've got this space in the building, like in the photograph here, where there's all these trusses in the way. No one's going to use that space. So can I remove that space for the purposes of calculating my volume? Well, the answer to that question is no, because that area is within the building, within the fire compartment, and therefore, of course, contributes to the volume for the purposes of C3D3. So what we've done for NCC 2022 is introduced this new defined term volume in order to clarify that and other things. Now, it might look complex, but actually what we're doing with this defined term is taking the various scenarios for which the concept of volume applies and setting out what the deemed to satisfy provisions require to be contributing to the volume calculation.